morning and welcome, friends. Our Washington, D.C. lodge, with others situated all over the world, meets on Sundays at 11 a.m. and a program which includes a talk presented by a student. And on the first and third Sundays of the month, we have a study class following our 11 a.m. Presentation, followed by questions and answers. The movement that came about in the 19th century brought out a tremendous amount of philosophical books for our study and comprehension, and all of the ULTs situated around the world are still disseminating the original works that was brought out at that time. Humanity is moving forward towards its spiritual expression, and today's talk, The Creative Will, is a subject that is connected to the opening of the higher mind and its expression through spiritual endeavor. The declaration. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical Movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is in two sections. The first one comes from the Bhagavad Gita. Those enlightened in the three Vedas, offering sacrifices to me and obtaining sanctification from drinking the soma juice, petition me for heaven, and thus they attain the region of Indra, the prince of celestial beings, and there feast upon celestial food and are gratified with heavenly enjoyments. And they, having enjoyed that spacious heaven for a period in proportion to their merits, sink back into this mortal world, where they are born again as soon as their stock or merit is exhausted. Thus those who long for the accomplishment of their desires, following the Vedas, obtain a happiness which comes and goes. But for those who, thinking of me as identical with all, constantly worship me, I bear the burden of the responsibility of their happiness. And even those also who worship other gods with a firm faith in doing so, involuntarily worship me too, O son of Kunti, albeit in ignorance. I am he who is the Lord of all sacrifices, and also their enjoyer. But they do not understand me truly, and therefore they fall from heaven. Those who devote themselves to the gods go to the gods. The worshippers of the Pitris go to the Pitris. Those who worship the evil spirits go to them, and my worshippers come to me. I accept and enjoy the offerings of the humble soul, who in his worship with a pure heart offereth a leaf, a flower, or fruit, or water unto me. Whatever thou doest, O son of Kunti, whatever thou eatest, whatever thou sacrificest, whatever thou givest, whatever mortification thou performest, commit each unto me. Thus thou shalt be delivered from the good and evil experiences which are the bonds of action, and thy heart being joined to renunciation and to the practice of action, thou shalt come to me. I am the same to all creatures. I know not hatred nor favor, but those who serve me with love dwell in me, and I in them. And this fragment comes from the voice of the silence. Desire nothing, chafe not at karma, nor at nature's changeless laws, but struggle only with the personal, the transitory, the evanescent, and the perishable. Help nature and work on with her, and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. And she will open wide before thee the portals of her secret chambers, lay bare before thy gaze the treasures hidden in the very depths of her pure virgin bosom. Unsullied by the hand of matter, she shows her treasures only to the eye of a spirit, the eye which never closes, the eye for which there is no veil in all her kingdoms. Then will she show thee the means and way, the first gate and the second, the third, up to the very seventh, and then the goal, beyond which lie, bathed in the sunlight of the spirit, glories untold, unseen by any save the eye of soul. And now today's talk, the creative will.
Thank you, friends. HPB told us in the October 1887 issue of Lucifer, which was her magazine, and it's reprinted in the February 2004 issue of the Theosophical Movement, that both will and desire are absolute creators, forming the man himself and his surroundings. But will creates intelligently, desire blindly, and unconsciously. The man therefore makes himself in the image of his desires, unless he creates himself in the likeness of the divine, through his will, the child of the light. His task is to awaken the will, to strengthen it by use and conquest, to make will absolute ruler within his body, and parallel with this, to purify desire, which we do that by knowledge and will, which are our tools for the accomplishment of the purification. We speak of will as a creative force. Everything that exists is a result of the will of the Spirit in action. Just as every element and characteristic of the whole ocean is contained in every single drop that composes it, so the will that has produced all is reflected in man. It is the offspring of the divine, the God in man. It is not lack of knowledge from which we suffer most. We suffer chiefly from weakness of will and of determination to apply what we already know. How are we to make the creative aspect of will work in the performance of our daily duties? The genius, the creative worker, is the one who takes the old material as he finds it and fashions it into something new. As Browning puts it, by the use of his godlike faculty, he forms of 3 notes, not a 4th, but a star. He can learn to create in a way such as to make drudgery divine. The really creative element in action starts with application in the little acts and events that go to make the sum total of man's life. The drab aspect of daily life changes when we learn that the deeds we perform are not done by the body, but are done by the soul in and through the body. Whatever our walk in life, we should learn to look for the inner meaning, the spiritual reality, the invisible glory behind all our visible, mundane, and often irksome tasks. Our power of will, imagination, thought, aspiration, or higher feeling helps us in endowing our works with sacramental value. This is the real meaning of dedicating all our actions to the Krishna within us. As the first speaker just read from the Gita, whatever thou doest, O son of Kunti, whatever thou eatest, whatever thou sacrificest, whatever thou givest, whatever mortification thou performest, commit each unto me. To stem the rising tide of passion, to cut off at the root the sapling of irritation before it grows into a tree of anger, to check the small greeds lest they develop into giants of possessiveness, to take care of minutes lest hours be misspent. That is what we owe not only to ourselves, but also to our fellow beings. In these small efforts, we can attain great results. Sincere students of Theosophy aim not only at becoming more efficient as speakers and writers, but also being more efficient in doing every task, whether viewed as personal duties or the most routine work of the Theosophical Movement. In such performance of plain duties, using our will to transform the mundane into the divine, the world is served and saved. Through that performance, the student of Theosophy is able to purify himself, to develop the inner spiritual will, and raise his mind to the level where the light of wisdom can shine into it. The uplifting advice of HPB and the also Theosophical Movement, which followed what she said, in the foregoing words, which we mentioned already, they help us better focus on making creative use of that power called will. Will exists in us as it does in the cosmos and all of nature. It operates by natural impulse in all creatures and matter up to the lighting up of mind in man. Then progress is dependent on the intensity and direction of our desires behind that universal will. So we first must take Plato's advice and get to know ourselves. H.P. Blavatsky, in transmitting to the modern world the science of the soul, attempted to prod our intuition by introducing the ancient ideas of that spark from which all proceed. Evolution of matter as spirit concretized, consciousness that exists in all matter, the twin doctrines of hope and responsibility, also known as reincarnation and karma, man's sevenfold nature, which helps us know ourselves as we really are, an assertion of the idea of as above, so below. HPB transmitted these ideas in the newly forming United States, whose government was being established with the idea of liberty and justice for all. Over the upcoming centuries, mankind will ever so gradually wake up. Our self-induced and self-induced and self-devised moment at a time, we will work our way out of this selfish dark age and bring about the selfless next age called the golden age. This student believes that man-made institutions like today's governments and religions, which too often get in the way of progress, will become history. Theosophy describes the sevenfold nature of man as, in two parts, a threefold permanent part called Buddhi and Manas, participating in the universal mind called Atma, and while embodied, a fourfold temporary part, passions and desires, life energy, astral body, and physical body. We often show this like this. Atma here, that's universal. Buddhi, Manas, making up our higher mind. And then we got passions and desires, which is here. And these are two parts, higher and lower mind. And then we have, well, it's also life energy, and we have the spiritual body, the astral body, and the physical body, which are here, 3. And there's this thing we call in Tascarana Bridge, which connects the two until we become perfected. So we are all very aware of this fourfold temporary part, the passions and desires, life energy, astral body, and physical body. Many think of our brain as our mind, but Theosophy teaches that the brain is merely an instrument of the dual nature of mind, which is characterized here. Our temporary nature of matter is selfish and tries to totally squeeze out the selfless and permanent intuitive nature, which is the triangle up there, thus setting up the greatest of all wars, that war of overcoming lower worldly allures as we reach up and try to align ourselves with our higher nature and Atma, that selfless universal principle. Nature exists for the sake of soul. As eternal programs gaining experience in all of nature's kingdoms, we humans are no longer propelled by natural impulse as are other kingdoms. We must now initiate the propulsion ourselves through self-induced and self-devised methods. Our duty, also known as Dharma, Our duty is to take advantage of opportunities to, as the first speaker read from the Voice of the Silence, to unselfishly work on with nature, and nature will open to us her secrets. Theosophy lays out the path of cycles and evolution. Associated with this path, again, are the twin doctrines of hope, reincarnation, and responsibility, karma. We all also need to have a clear understanding as to what is meant by the word creative. A common idea is that a supreme being, a creator, made the world out of nothing. But the song phrase from the sound of music, quote, "Nothing can come from nothing, and nothing ever could," unquote, suggests that humanity knows intuitively, at least, and is increasingly expressing openly this idea that is expressed in the song. Theosophists or occultists do not use the word creation for that reason. They don't use it at all. But they replace the word with the word evolution. We also come to realize that we impact evolution through our every thought and action. Our elder brothers help us more than we may realize, but we must do our own duty as gods in training. Mr. Judge calls duty the royal talisman. A duty we may choose to do is to help keep the link of pure theosophy unbroken by study and otherwise, by showing up to meetings, by contributing thoughts to discussions, by making suggestions, by carrying on all other lodge work, and by donating money. Then there's the idea of imagination, which is number 4 down here. The lower mind has difficulty accepting that imagination is real. We all always hear this term, this all in your imagination. But again, nothing can come from nothing. If we accept that we never were not, the idea comes in that something that appears to be new is really not new. Ancient teachings tell us that the idea of concentration, contemplation, and meditation, here we go, again, these things, concentration, contemplation, and meditation, can be a good help in our understanding the idea of imagination. Many realize that we are image makers, but most don't know how to approach the use and application of this tool of forming and reflecting an image. Use of the idea of one-pointedness, which is here in parentheses somewhere. Here we go. One-pointedness and concentration of thought and imagination can be helpful here. The trained imagination must come from, again, training in past lives. The trained imagination must come from training in past lives and our current lifetime. Mr. Judge said that when trained, imagination is the constructor in the human workshop, a most useful faculty with dynamic forces, powers, energy, and forces surface that most are not aware of through this process. Such a faculty can be trained and used in bringing out our dormant powers. The idea of concentration and meditation on a daily basis can direct our lower desires to will intelligently as absolute creators. This kind of training of the imagination requires persistence and is not easy. We must hang on to the idea of not what I can do for myself, but what I can do to bring harmony and real progress for mankind. It can be a simple thing, a situation, an idea, or whatever. As for the word will, the Theosophical Glossary tells us will is that which governs the manifested universe in eternity. Will is the one and sole principle of abstract eternal motion, or its ensouling essence. The will is the property of all spiritual beings and displays itself in them the more actively, the more they are freed from matter. And Paracelsus teaches that determined will is the beginning of all magical operations. It is because men do not perfectly imagine and believe the results that the occult arts are so uncertain, while they might be perfectly certain. Like all the rest, the will is septenary in the degrees of manifestation, emanating from the one eternal, abstract, and purely quiescent will, Atma, there. It becomes Buddhi in its alaya state, alaya meaning universal soul as the basis of all. In the listing of cosmic planes, alaya is regarded as the sixth, one counting from the lowest upwards. However, it is also reflected on the corresponding prakritic planes. In human beings, Buddhi is regarded as a ray of alaya. So it becomes Buddhi in its alaya state. It descends lower as Mahat, or Manas, and runs down the ladder of degrees until the divine Eros becomes, in its lower animal manifestation, erotic desire. Will, as an eternal principle, is neither spirit nor substance, but everlasting ideation. Will, then, is a force of consciousness in action. Mr. Judge tells us that the subject of the will received no treatment in the ocean of Theosophy, inasmuch as that power or faculty is hidden, subtle, undiscoverable as to essence, and only visible in effect. As it is absolutely colorless and varies in moral quality in accordance with the desire behind it, as also it acts frequently without our knowledge, and it operates in all the kingdoms below man, there could be nothing gained by attempting to inquire into it apart from the spirit and the desire in this little book called the Ocean. Mr. Judge also tells us that desire is the basis of action and mover of the will, and that right desire leads to right act. So we can almost say that will just is. We can observe the effects of will. Will is eternal and everlasting principle. It is an ideation from the eternal that is even cosmic in its scope, not just in man or the lower kingdoms. The mysterious effects of attraction and repulsion are the unconscious agents of that will. For example, magnets are not consciously attracted to each other, nor consciously repel from each other if you reverse them. You push and then you flip them around and they won't match up. But man has a conscious effect on will. It is our desire that will color the will. Hence the phrase, behind will stands desire. The higher the desire, the higher the effect on the will, and vice versa, down to the baser instincts that will lower the effects. If we think on a low level, that's what the effect will be. Will is inherent in all at the same degree. It is our desire, and from which it flows, from the higher or unselfish to the lower or selfish nature, that directs the function and intensity of will. Will cannot function on its own. It must have the desire principle and works in accordance with the impulse of desire. Fear interferes with that impulse and can keep the will from moving forward. As karma impacts desire, so it impacts the will's action. So desire is the key to progress, and we can work on desire in order to elevate the will. We can use concentration and meditation to change the desires that we do have. Mind initiates action on the very plane of our desires. So, to make our will strong, we should have fewer desires and make those desires pure, strong, and altruistic. So I'm going to stop it here and open the floor for questions and comments. There's a lot more, but you probably are tired of hearing me talk. So, raise any issues you have.
Is it proposing that will lives outside of, or exists outside of us, and is a force that we are receiving, and is it equal? Because it sounded almost like it was an overarching equal force, even force that everyone has access to. But what then is it when people say that they have less will than others, or it's evident in the things that they do that they just don't have as much willpower as other people? How could it be even or equal for all if that's what it's saying?
Your question is right on the mark. Will is
please repeat
like
the question. Repeat the question.
The question is, do different people have different amounts of will? It's kind of what you asked for.
Mm-hmm. And does it live inside of us or outside?
Inside or outside?
Different force that.
Okay. Both.
Both. That's
Will is like a drop of ocean water. Water is all the same in the ocean, right? That drop it got a little bit of all that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same as will. Will is there. It is universal for us to tap into.
Mm-hmm.
It's not it is within us and without us for that reason.
So the desire
is the same.
Is the desire
is what drives
gives it the driving force,
right.
And either you have more or less willpower based on how much you desire the outcome.
Exactly. You don't have relative amount of will.
Right.
Your desire is what drives it.
This student has read something to the effect that will is a power of the higher mind, and that when we do all those qualifications you listed, altruism, helping others, not putting your lower self ahead of everybody else, it slowly moves the mind, the higher mind, to express itself. So the lower mind slowly loses its power. But the lower mind is the one, I think, that is desire-based, is it not? That when we have personal desires, it's that intellectual mind we're using to get to whatever it is that we're doing. But HPV also has an article where she states that without desire, there would be no movement. So to go from one to the other, is a conscious effort at this stage, but once that higher aspect takes a hold and expresses, it says that thought and will become one and is endowed with creative power. That's a very powerful statement.
Sure is.
To put these things, but to understand them and to apply them is another inner perceptive power you require for it.
Absolutely.
To have that become one, and then is endowed with creative power. So she's actually telling us to contact the field operation of ideas, because that's the higher aspect of us and not the physical aspect, which is on earth. It's the ideas that move the world.
Ideas rule the world, that's what Plato said. And that's
So that's what we're asked to do.
Yeah.
That those listed things actually work with those field. It's the field work of ideas, which is a higher potency.
Correct.
To this student's understanding,
Yeah.
anyway.
We live in that, and we're surrounded by that all the time. And it's very easy to shut this out.
No, it's automatic. I think it's the
It's-
lower
it's almost
mind that
automatic,
cuts it
yeah.
out.
But we have this in Tuscarora because as we work on it, we got to focus on that will all the time, and make it the highest possible. Okay. This is what we connected here to the Antascarana, because as embodied folks, we unless we're perfect, this drops off when you become perfected. There are beings that know how to embody themselves, and they come around as they choose to do so, to help us and so forth. Until we get to that point, we have the Tuscarora Bridge, where we look up to the higher principles, that consciousness, if you will. That inner conscious that Mom always said, if you don't listen to it, that little voice goes away. And that's kind of what we're talking about here.
But to follow up on that, you also said that we have 7 principles.
Yep.
According to what our thinking is, we're continuously up and down. Not only
Correct.
the 7, but the 7 is divided, each one is divided into another 7. So we really have 49 to work with.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are not doing this purposefully. Even those who are aware of it cannot be purposely doing it. Otherwise, you would be watching the threshold of your mind continuously, which is a stage that we have to go through.
Yeah.
Until such, a lot of people unconsciously to themselves are thinking up and down those principles.
Of course, yeah. You have to focus on it. And it's said that, while the intellectual is important for us here, nothing against the colleges and universities of the world, but if we become very intellectual, it's much more difficult to become spiritual. So it's, because we get so entwined in all this stuff, we spend our lives learning the nuts and bolts of the world that we need to learn, we need to operate from when we're embodied. So, I mean, that's kind of the way it is. It takes a long time. Most of the time could be many lifetimes we're looking at. And we don't have the idea of reincarnation too well ingrained in the West. So it's a lot of opportunities we have in this, just one thought at a time and one person at a time is what it's going to take to go through this. And it can be discouraging if you look at the one life theory, and we live here 80 years of whatever our little lifetime is. And if we think about that, these ideas, if we just focus on that as a one life theory, they're meaningless. But when you realize that we go from life to life and never were never were not shall we ever be, then it makes sense. But you got to realize that you can't think about, instant changes. In the ocean, it's got a little table there. We're talking thousands and millions of years. But we can't wait until the million years up and think we're going to get there. We're not going to do it. We have to try every second. Yes?
So you're saying that consciousness is on a continuum.
Yes.
But the West does not have any such philosophy. So it makes it really difficult to understand that there is no such thing as death as prescribed by the religious world, that is only the body and the lower principles that drop off. The triad that you have put up there as a triangle is the permanent individuality of each human being, and that is what you're saying, that goes from life to life, and is the knower also. All the experiences of that human soul is strung on that thread that HBB talks about in the voice of the silence, the silver or the golden thread.
Yeah.
So if there is no death, then actually it takes the sting out of death.
Sure it does.
And it makes you understand that you're not here just this short period of time, and that you're going to come back. But it also gives you that possibility or chance to assume responsibility for yourself, because your thinking, your speech, and your actions totaled together is going to determine your next incarnation.
Right.
So people with no thought of that, and they're just haphazardly going about their lives thinking that they're endowed with things and then you're going to lose it at the end, how are they to come to this very uplifting philosophy that we are immortal beings, but we have to actually get our immortality when we are in incarnation? Because how else would we do it during the rest period, whether it is pralaya for our world or our own rest period between two incarnations on earth, whether you call it heaven or Davakan, it changes nothing. Then who is responsible for your actions? People say, are you telling me that I actually did it? Like for illness, for instance. Of course, we're responsible for what we eat, how we digest our food, whether we exercise, whether we're beneficent to other people. All these lives that come into us can be beneficent or otherwise maleficent. It's the thinking process, the speech, the activity that follows it that determines whether they're friendly or unfriendly. So we really need to start thinking from the elemental outwards, because all the elemental world, the lives that we take in, come in to support us as a unit. But if we are not beneficent to them, we're not uplifting them, because we're impressing them electromagnetically. We're impressing all those lives with our thinking.
We're constantly impressing on all lives and everyone around us. And that's,
so how are we going to interject
it's
this continuum of consciousness when science does not understand the significance of the higher intuitional mind, the divine mind, and the intellectual, because they consider the intellectual total?
Yeah. Well, next week we have a talk on science and the secret doctrine. We have that as our subject for next Sunday, and you kind of gave a segue for that talk in your comment.
Science is not diminished
not the science
in this conversation here.
It's material
because
science.
HPV says that science has done a tremendous
they
benefit
are a
to
friend,
humanity by moving the mind from that dogma of the religious part of it. But they themselves now have become materialistic, because they only work on the physical plane, whereas there is one principle of us, which is the body on the physical plane, and even the atoms that occupy the body are not physical. They are psycho-spiritual. Molecular combinations we can observe, but not the atoms themselves, because they don't belong to the physical level. Scientists are coming to the conclusion of that, and now they're talking to the Dalai Lama to learn how to meditate so that they can actually perceive on higher levels of consciousness, to see what happens to the atoms when they lose them or their path. Because if they are moving to a higher level of energy, then they're not on this plane. You're not going to be able to follow them. So science needs to move towards the Eastern ideology so that they can get to the inner construction of these realities, because they do exist, but they don't exist on this level.
You made me realize something I haven't never seen in any literature. We're saying that will, as the judge said, will you can see the effects of, you really can't see it. It's the same with atoms, and we've never seen an atom. No scientist ever has seen an atom. They can only see the effects, and they have this huge thing in Europe, I think, where they watch atoms, the effect of atoms banging against each other.
The path they follow. Yeah, it's energy. They are, according to the book you're referring to, the voice says, no, the ocean says that it is our responsibility as the highest intelligence on earth to make a conscious effort to uplift these elementals which constitute the atoms on our physical level, because they're the ones that combine. So if we don't make a conscious effort, he says that at the beginning they were really beneficent to us, because we find the astral plane clean and beneficent. But she says through misuse, we're continuously projecting our ideology onto it, and it is retained because it gets printed on it. Mm-hmm. And then she says it reflects back on humanity. So it becomes our responsibility to clear our thought process, to have these uplifting, unifying thoughts. Because when you understand that consciousness is universal, unity is universal, so then brotherhood is a true reality in nature, because there is no division of anything in it. But because we are individuals, we look at our environment from our personal view. But if we saw the inner light in each human heart, then we would actually realize that the light that is either whatever you call it, Christ principle, Krishna, God, whatever name we give it, it's the same light. But that light comes from a source. So its root is one. It's like the sun giving out these sparks that become the human individuality, but the light comes from the same root. Right. So the inner life of us, the soul spirit aspect of us, is also one. We think it's separate, but it is not separate. It is not separate. We're all interrelated to one another, whether we perceive it or not, and whether we accept it or not, we are. So brotherhood on earth is a reality also, when we perceive that inner light being the same in every human being. And when we look at the inner life, then we realize we constitute one humanity. We're all brothers and sisters. There is no separation.
Guess who creates that separateness?
The lower self.
We do.
Lower self.
Man does. Yeah.
Yeah. So all these nations all over the world are just part of the same family. The regions, language, culture changes, but the inner identity of the human being is the same.
Yeah. It's very difficult for us to imagine the idea of one-pointedness, where we are able to see all from the highest level to the most minute particle or most minute thing there is, you know. And it's said over and over again that we have that ability within us. And this is how we generate it in a nutshell.
Can you please comment on the, I think you said imagination is necessary for the creative will to operate? Is that what you said?
Well, yeah, we have to respect imagination and just not dismiss it, because that imagination, yeah, some things get, things get mixed up as we get experience from life to life, and then we get into dreams, and there's separate talks on that. But sometimes we have a dream and you get up and what in the world was all that about anyway? But then there's also the dreams that foretell what comes next, and there are those who are able to interpret them and maybe save a lot of people by so doing. I'm not sure if I've forgotten what you asked for now, but anyway, the point is, I mean, that's part of imagination, what I'm talking about with respect to dreams.
What you were talking
we
about.
have to be able to shine from above, and rather than using that, that intellectual reasoning process has its place, very important when we're embodied, but shining from above is what we're talking about now. Being able to interpret all this, and we can do that too.
But you were talking about the imagination.
Yeah.
Imagination is the creative power of making images.
Exactly. Image maker. Imagination, we are image makers.
So then, are you saying that image making power actually can be so forceful that it creates forms?
Oh, yes.
So
that's how forms get created. Really, there's no difference between spirit and matter. And if this is the way this student understands it anyhow. It comes from the same source, but it separates out kind of because when we become embodied and so forth, then we have two sides of the coin, the spirit and matter. But it's all the same at the highest level.
It's concretized on the physical level.
Concretized spirit is that's what matter is.
Otherwise, you won't be able to objectively see it.
Yeah.
But who can say that they have seen their own soul?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not objective. You need an inner perceptive power for that.
You can see the effects of a pure soul, but you can't see that soul.
I'm sure there are some amongst us who can, but most of us cannot.
Yeah, until we get up there, we can't do it.
So how do you train your imagination then, if it is connected to the creative will in formulating form? Is that what artists use, for instance?
Yeah.
That their imagination is so powerful,
Right.
They can imagine it and transfer it to the canvas? Is that the same process?
Mm-hmm. That's what it says. We take what's existing and we create stuff out of it. That's what we do on the physical level. Yeah. We have a wonderful imagination, a creative will, creative imagination.
Well, what happens to that other statement that HPB has in The Secret Doctrine, where she says, if the archetypal form did not exist in the Akashic light, we would never be able to come up with it. So does that mean that there's an original form and then we can work on that and improve it and change it?
Well, the original form is formless. That's the student's understanding. Yes, this form is created out of will, spirit, whatever, at that level. Yeah, it can be changed. for example, we were at one time we're egg-born. One time humans were egg-born. Over time, over millions of years, we went away from the egg-born type being. We had to work. Everything that comes standard, comes without thinking about it these days. Like the heart beating, we had to work at making that heart beat in early stages of development. We had to work at breathing. It was a conscious effort every time that we took a breath. And now it's done automatically. We don't even think about it.
What do you mean by egg-born? We're egg-born now too. It's just
We are,
that
that's
so
true.
minute, you don't see it externally. But without the egg, there would be no birth. So what exactly are you getting at?
Well, I would say we were a globular form in early development. I think that's what I was thinking about in terms of the egg.
Oh, you're
maybe.
talking about when we were androgynous?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I
so
mean,
now
the physical form. Yeah.
we're divided into two male, female, and so each has half of the genome
Right.
that is contributed to
We
the
separate out.
new birth.
Yeah.
Well, but I think the secret doctrine says that we were also a sweat-born at one time,
Yep.
and that it hardened and became an egg.
It's also been
but
said
she
that
does not really explain
animals
it.
are sweat-born from humans.
I
We
don't
did not
understand
come
what
from
that
an
means.
ape, so
I don't know what that means. I read it, but I don't really understand it. She said
I
that
don't
we're
really
the ones
understand
who
it either. but
deform
Yeah.
from our leftover material, she says in the secret doctrine.
Yeah.
All of the animal kingdom came about, but I really don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't either. But it's a lot of things I don't understand. I just what little I think I understand makes sense. I figured I'll park over here what I don't understand until I can figure it out. I
Yeah.
accept it right now.
There's
If it's in the sacred doctrine, I assume that it's correct until I can figure out otherwise, and I've never found any error in it. So
Yeah, a lot of people read that secret doctrine and say that it was her imagination that brought it about, because it is so difficult to get at the root ideas.
Yeah.
But I think once you figure out, you are not really reading what's on paper. You have to read what's underneath the
Underneath
paper,
the
sort
Yeah.
of, because that print is an expression, but the meaning that it implies is on a different plane of existence. Remember, her soul was in that writing, and she expressed it in English for the Western world first. Then she went on and started it in India to reinitiate the culture of the Indian youth. Then she came to London and started it there. So these three centers have to play a prominent role somehow in uniting humanity into one brotherhood. Because somewhere she says that the mother of America, which is England, United Kingdom, their tenacity is important to incorporate into the human nature, because she says once you can raise that tenacity in the English, they will stay with it.
yes.
So that, and then the India has the spiritual philosophy. Karma and reincarnation is definitely rooted there. Tibet, Ceylon, Japan, India, a lot of the Chinese, all of the Buddhistic ones, they all believe in karma and reincarnation, and the physical body is not very important to them. But in the West, it's the opposite way. So obviously we have to incorporate things that exist over there into this culture, so that the united aim can then bring about what this philosophy envisioned at that time, which is collective brotherhood. that we become helpers, not just to ourselves as a nation, but extend a helping hand to other nations, incorporate them in it too.
You just had the last word for this hour. We're going to take a brief break, and we have an afternoon roundtable on the ocean of Theosophy and answers to questions. This is basically a mini secret doctrine, very much exactly along the lines of the secret doctrine. So that will come up next, and next week's presentation will be on science and the secret doctrine. Thank you for joining us.